To participate fully in this Good Friday service, you may want to gather a candle, a lighter, a bowl of water, a rock, shiny if possible, a piece of paper, and a pen or pencil. Good Friday is good only in that God is at work. This service honors the ancient story of Jesus' death while recognizing the way that this narrative repeats itself again and again throughout the past and the present. The service provides ways to engage, to confess, to lament, creating a profound Holy Week worship experience.
have tasted the goodness of the Word of God.
And yet we often fall away from it, crucifying Jesus anew.
Again and again we tell the story.
And again we find ourselves here in the story.
For as often as necessary, let us relive it so that with God's help, we will no longer repeat it.
Holy God, as we journey through this familiar story, help us to understand it anew. Show us, O God, where and why we find ourselves here again and again, and move us toward a more just future. Amen.
Station of the Cross 1, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
It is night. It is dark on our journey to the garden.
Take a light.
Yes, we take a light so we can see what we are meant to see. Wherever you are, light your candle. Again and again, we need the light of God to be with us wherever we are.
Trust God's light.
Matthew 26, verses 36 through 41. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak."
Several times during this service, we will lead you in a contemplative engagement. We may ask thoughtful questions or suggest an activity. We will allow moments of silence for your reflection. To start with, consider a person in your life, other than yourself, who is having an exceptionally difficult time at the moment. On a piece of paper, write a prayer for the person you've been considering.
Station of the Cross 2. Jesus is betrayed by Judas and arrested.
Another contemplative engagement. Take hold of your rock. With it in your hand, consider grief. The grief of Jesus' disciples. The grief of others. Your grief. The grief of the world. Now, as you drop your rock into your bowl of water, watch the splash and the ripples. They signify our tears of profound grief collected by God. These watchers, blessed by God, serve to wash over us again and again with the baptismal promises of forgiveness and belonging.
Mark 14, verses 43 to 46. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. Again and again, we betray one another and God. We confess our part in the fragmentation of the human family, and we lament our brokenness.
You are invited to tear up your prayer you just wrote, but do not discard the shreds. Each piece of our lives is held in God's care, even when we doubt or fear.
Station of the Cross 3. Jesus is denied by Peter.
Matthew 26, 69 to 75. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
The good that we would do, we do not do. Even when we are not willfully malicious, we fail the human family through our fear and timidity. We neglect to stand up for what's right or come to another's aid when they cry out. Sometimes we just don't want to be bothered with the world's ills. We do lament. We lament that others suffer when we seek self-preservation.
Continue tearing up your written paper into even smaller pieces. As you do, consider this question. How often do we turn our backs on human suffering? Who could we become if we refuse to turn away?
Again and again, we turn our backs on each other. Even when we are not willfully malicious, we fail Sometimes we don't even see what's in front of us, what the need is, and what we can do or give.
Station of the Cross 4. Jesus is judged by Pontius Pilate.
Again and again, we find ways to judge the other. Even when we are not sure, or even when we have strong convictions, we dare to claim power over others. We fool ourselves in claiming that we stand in the righteous way of God and that we know best. We fail by forgetting to be faithful to God's ways.
Mark 15, 1 through 5, and 15. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priest accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
This station of the cross lifts up the work of the Innocence Project 8, a nonprofit working to exonerate the wrongly convicted through DNA testing and reform the criminal justice system to prevent the future injustice.
Kennedy Brewer was sentenced to death by the state of Mississippi for a murder he did not commit. Though DNA evidence overturned his conviction, prosecutors intended to retry him, and he remained incarcerated for 5 more years before his release.
Habib Wahir Abdal served 16 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was exonerated after DNA evidence ruled him out as a suspect. 6 years later, he passed away.
In 1983, George Allen Jr. was wrongly convicted of capital murder, rape, sodomy, and first-degree burglary. He served 30 years of his 95-year sentence before being exonerated. He died 3 years later.
Again and again, our lips and laws bear false witness against our neighbors. Holy One, save us from this appetite for injustice and turn our hearts toward truth.
The stories of those who've been helped by the Innocence Project can be found on their website at innocenceproject.org.
Station of the Cross 5. Jesus is scourged at the pillar and crowned with thorns.
Try to reassemble the paper you previously tore up. Notice the scarring and brokenness of the paper where it was torn. What feelings are evoked when you see the fragmenting and violence done to something you created with such love and care?
John 19, 1-3. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face.
Station of the Cross 6. Jesus is crucified.
Consider who Jesus is to you.
John 19:16-22. Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write, 'The King of the Jews,' but this man said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
What distinction or declaration would you give to him on the cross? What sign would you place above Jesus hanging on the cross?
Station of the Cross 7. Jesus promises his kingdom to a thief.
This station of the cross draws from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, which keeps records of the last words of executed offenders.
The last words of Justin Hall, executed by the state of Texas on November 6, 2019. Yeah, I want to address the Roundtree family and apologize for the pain and suffering I caused, and then to the Diaz's family that I had to put you through this. It should have never happened. And to my mom and Morialia, I love you, and I'm going to miss you all. I'm ready. The last words of Arturo Diaz, executed by the state of Texas on September 26, 2013. I hope that this serves as an example for the youngsters. Think about it before you make a bad decision. Let's go, Warden. I'm ready.
The last words of George Whitaker III, executed by the state of Texas on November 12, 2008. First off, I'd like to say to Mr. and Mrs. Carrier, I apologize for your pain and suffering. I pray, Lord, please forgive me.
23, 39 through 43. One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
Station of the Cross 8. Jesus speaks to his mother and the beloved disciple.
John 19, 25 to 27. And that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home.
In this Good Friday service, we witness the project Pieta. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother, by artist and minister Reverend T.D. Anderson, the author of this liturgy. This is a visual art and sermon project on Emmett Till's murder, with a particular focus on his mother.
2020 can be counted by many of us, I think, as one of the worst years of our lives, if not the worst. For me, it just felt like a constant, unending Good Friday experience where you are witness to horror after horror after horror without any apparent end or relief. We had moved to Louisville, Kentucky the year prior, so it hadn't yet been a year for us when the COVID-19 pandemic emerged. And for as much as the pandemic stopped in our lives, it couldn't stop everything. For instance, it couldn't stop this practice of extrajudicial killings of Black people in Louisville, Kentucky, found itself as one of the epicenters of racial unrest in America. And as things were ramping up in the case against the police officers who were involved in the issuing of the knock warrant the night Breonna was killed, we were also nearing the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder. And I was just wondering what about that is pertinent. There feels like there's something here. And as a creative, the way I lean into grief is to create through it. And I wanted to create through this. You think back on the events of 1955 and what Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley did and how that catalyzed a movement. It's just unthinkable that we are still wrestling with these very issues that took her son from her. And I just needed to paint through that. And with 2020 feeling like a Good Friday experience, I think of Jesus's words in John's gospel talking about that day where he says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And, there's no indication who he's talking about, if he's talking about himself or the beloved disciple. But what would it mean for Mary to look at her son as he's being lynched? Because he was being lynched. What kind of fortitude would that take? Where would you have to go? And so I dove into Mrs. Till Mobley's narrative to see what it took for her. What does it take to witness that horror? And how long will it take for us to pay attention to what it does to her and to other mothers?
Who is my mother?
Those who suffer the greatest losses, yet commit to doing the greatest good.
Who are my siblings?
Those who bind our wounds in our time of need.
Who do you receive as your own family? Who suffers in silence? Whose pain is ignored or marginalized? To whom must we turn our attention?
To the vulnerable and the marginalized.
To those who are in the crosshairs of racism, xenophobia, food insecurity, exploitation, and discrimination. To the neighbors we have yet to fully behold.
Again and again, Jesus calls us to see one another and to be family.
Station of the Cross 9. Jesus dies on the cross.
Luke 23:44-46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last.
It was now about noon.
can't breathe.
Station of the Cross 10. Jesus is placed in the tomb.
Matthew 27, verses 57 through 60. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away.
Imagine laying with Jesus in this tomb.
as you go your way.
Do not look away. Do not rush to redeem this violence. Do not carry on as if nothing is wrong. Grieve this. Mourn this. Sit with this. And if you cannot sit and mourn with those who mourn, grieve with those who grieve.
Go in peace, understanding that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. May God's Spirit direct you to create the kind of justice that was denied to Jesus on this day. Amen.
Amen.